Here's Jim with his interview now with his special guest.
Business makes the world go round, or at least money makes the world go round, so they say, and there's no doubt that there's a lot of truth to that statement. Entrepreneurial leaders are very much vaunted these days, and there's a lot of talk about leadership development, what it means to be an entrepreneur. Very few have focused on what it means to be a Christian entrepreneur in a secular world. Richard Goossen has done that, and before I introduce him to you, take a look at this.
I define an entrepreneur as somebody who has an idea and runs with it, somebody who's not afraid to take a chance.
Identify opportunities in the marketplace and create a business and an organization that can meet that need in the marketplace.
A successful entrepreneur has to have three things going for them. They have to have passion, they have to have ability, and the last thing is they've got to have somebody that's going to pay something for whatever that is.
I would say they're not doing it for money. They believe in the idea and they think they can make a difference. I think if you look at any successful entrepreneur, they're passionate about what they do.
They usually do what they enjoy doing. If you enjoy what you do, you'll make a success of it. That's the biggest thing.
I read something recently that Warren Buffett never wants to buy a company from somebody that wants to sell it. And that tells you something, because somebody that wants to sell their business may not necessarily be that passionate about it. Warren Buffett wants to buy from people that don't want to sell because they obviously are passionate about what they're doing.
Yes, we want to make money, of course. Why else be in business if you can't make money? But more importantly, everything we had to do, or we wanted it to, was to honor God and to live by biblical principles within our company.
I think it's important to let your faith be known, but let it be known, as I say, a lot is through actions and the way that you would talk to people.
When I interact with people, I always think back to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I really believe in that, and that's how we've always dealt with our customers. If we can help them, we really work to help them. Something I'd say to a new entrepreneur to succeed is you need to find something that you love and go for it.
So Richard Goossen is my guest, and he is the author of several books. One of them I'm holding here called Entrepreneurial Leaders, Reflections on Faith at Work. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Now, you have quite a reputation yourself as an entrepreneur. Just to kind of set the context, what has your experience been as an entrepreneur before you started studying entrepreneurs?
I think the reputation is way overstated, by the way.
Well, I mean, what I've read about you is very impressive.
Oh, it's a lot better on paper than in reality. But in any event, I have a legal background, so I studied at McGill University and Columbia. I spent 5 years in Hong Kong, and I had a number of Chinese partners, and we started a company. We grew it from scratch to $30 million a year in sales. We were doing property development. We had a seat on the Hong Kong Exchange, also doing Forex trading. And so that's a bit of my own experience. I also grew up in an entrepreneurial family, so it's always been part of my lifeblood, as it were. So even though I had a legal background, I was always drawn to doing entrepreneurial things.
Now, tell me about your organization, your leadership organization. I'm looking here at an Entrepreneurial Leaders Conference program that you hosted last fall.
Right.
But tell me about this very interesting organization you've put together.
Well, what happened was about 6 years ago, I had the idea of starting a conference specifically to focus on equipping, connecting, and inspiring Christian entrepreneurial leaders. And the first year we did it, it was based on me having done interviews with various Christian entrepreneurs. We compiled the interviews in a book and thought we would do a book launch. We weren't sure who would show up, and like typical entrepreneurs, we just thought we'd throw it out there and see what happened. So the first year we had 200 people show up, then next year 300, then 400, then 500. So now we're planning for the 7th year. But what has shown is that there's a real huge need for Christian entrepreneurs to be equipped, connected, and inspired. So those are the things we focus on. Equipped because most of them don't get the in-depth theological training in terms of the marketplace. It's just not something that's that widely available. And then connecting, one critical thing with entrepreneurs is that they love to connect. And I think there's real strength in numbers. So when we get 400 to 500 Christian entrepreneurs together in one room at one time in a downtown hotel, people are just amazed that there's that many Christians.
No, when you say they love to connect, that surprises me because it seems to me an entrepreneur is a bit of a lone ranger, a pioneer, a loner, somebody who likes his own company. Why do you like to connect? To kind of lick mutual wounds, or just to find commonality?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. It's almost this paradox where most entrepreneurs, they are lone rangers to some extent, but what happens is they like to connect, but with peers. So when they're in a company, it's hard for them to relate to people within their company sometimes, and even within their church, because let's say if a Bible study group is composed of, say, 10 or 15 people, and maybe a couple of those people are getting laid off and they're working for a company, they're talking about their employer, and yet in there you've got an entrepreneur who's maybe employing 50, 100, 1,000 people. So there's a bit of a different viewpoint on some of these issues. So a lot of these entrepreneurs, they actually feel quite isolated in church and even within their own companies. So when we have this event, we're able to attract leading Christian entrepreneurial leaders who love to get together because they're meeting with peers. So that's the critical thing. And these events have to be done on a big enough scale and with good enough speakers that these entrepreneurs who typically don't go to any event, don't get out of the house much, that they will come to this. And then what's fascinating is they see all these other entrepreneurs that they didn't realize were Christian. So then you have this, and what we do is completely ecumenical, non-denominational, and what I find is people are often in their denominational silos, so this gives them a real opportunity to connect with people, with Christians throughout the whole business community.
Now, you mentioned a third. You mentioned three things.
Right.
You mentioned. Now, let me see if I'm listening to you. Equipping, connecting, and
inspiring.
Inspiring.
Right. You're a really good listener. most people would just go on.
And the inspirational element it comes how?
Well, usually what we do is during the daytime sessions we have speakers that focus on equipping, more content, whereas we have evening speakers that are more on the inspirational side. So this year we have Michael Flaherty, who's president and co-founder of Walden Media, producers of the Chronicle of Narnia films. And so usually we like to get a really well-known person who can share their own testimony and story of the challenges that they've encountered along the way, and yet despite those challenges, they've been able to stay true to their faith and really make an impact in the marketplace.
Now, excuse me, these conferences, what do you call them?
So they're entrepreneurial leader conferences.
Entrepreneurial leader conferences, and you have a website for that?
Right. So the website is eleaders.org.
Eleaders.org.
Yeah.
Leaders.org.
Entrepreneurial leaders is too long.
And so if people, like if there are entrepreneurs listening to you right now and they say, hey, that's something I'd like to participate in, if they log on to eleaders.org, they can maybe find their way to the next one?
Yeah, exactly. So on the homepage, we've got the information on the upcoming conference, which is November 8th to 9th. The conferences are always in Vancouver, and we draw people from throughout Canada, the U.S., even Asia, and Europe.
Now, we've got about 4 minutes left. I want to just reflect on your book. You asked them all the same questions. These are all various entrepreneurs. You had various interviewers, some students, some you did yourself. I'm very impressed that you've got a connection with Oxford.
Cambridge.
Or Cambridge. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. A friend of mine is Peter Heslem, and we connected through a mutual friend, and he has a research center there called Transforming Business, which focuses on enterprise solutions to poverty. So it's using entrepreneurial skills to alleviate poverty. You know, it sort of ties in with micro-enterprise lending. And we started to collaborate on the research. So he actually uses my research model, these interviews, and starting to interview entrepreneurs in third world countries. So I have a position there as Director of Entrepreneurial Leadership at University of Cambridge.
Well,
so.
that looks good in your resume.
Yeah.
and I noticed one of the entrepreneurs in here is working in Khayelitsha. I know Khayelitsha very well. It's a kind of a ring of poverty surrounding Cape Town, and I was fascinated at what he's doing there. But so you asked all these entrepreneurs similar questions or the same questions. They responded to a questionnaire. Something that stuck out as I was reading was hardly any of them said it was a good thing to hire fellow Christians. Especially Christians from the church. I'm thinking,
right.
What's up with that? Is it because in hiring a fellow Christian, that fellow Christian comes in with some kind of expectation of an easy road because you're fellow Christians?
Yeah, I think there's an added layer of complication that most entrepreneurs feel is not justified. Because what will happen is Sometimes a pastor will say, oh, Bob was just laid off, do you mind giving him a job? So then sometimes the entrepreneur is viewed as a part social worker, where you're not hiring the person based on merit, but by doing a favor. Or let's say it's the son of someone in the congregation, and maybe that son's not that motivated of a worker, but then that son might think he should be given a free pass, not work as hard, because there's that personal connection with the entrepreneur.
Yeah. Now, some of them had good experiences with hiring church people, but generally that was not the case. The other thing that stuck out to me was you asked them how important a role education played in their entrepreneurial enterprises, and hardly any of them said it helped at all.
Right.
Pretty much every one of them, regardless of their education or lack thereof, just learned by doing.
Right. So what happened is all the research I've done with Christian entrepreneurs, which is 250 interviews over 7 years, it's all consistent with mainstream entrepreneurial research. But what's interesting is, so most entrepreneurs succeed without education, but at the same time, once they succeed, they don't hire people like themselves, they hire people who are well educated. Yeah. So it just goes to show that the entrepreneurial skill is almost like a Gretzky-like talent on one level. All of us can be entrepreneurial and innovative at some degree, but to actually have that extraordinary success takes extraordinary talent. And most, like a Jimmy Pattison, who I interviewed, he would say, you can't teach people to be entrepreneurial. I'd say, well, you can, but only at a certain level. You can't teach somebody to be a Jimmy Pattison. That's like saying Gretzky could teach his kids to be the next Gretzky.
Another thing that stuck out to me as I was reading your book was the critical role that wives played in these entrepreneurs' lives. Like, entrepreneur after an entrepreneur tells you, as you interview them, how important their wife has been.
Right.
Did that surprise you?
Not really, because one entrepreneur made a great point. He was a billionaire. He was the 18th wealthiest person in Canada, and he said the more successful he became, the less friends he had. And so your circle keeps shrinking, because then you question everyone's motives, because now that you're a billionaire, people see that instead of you as a person. So typically their spouse is the closest person to them, and then from that maybe their siblings, maybe their kids, but it becomes a pretty small circle for an entrepreneur.
You didn't ask any of them what they intend to do with their money and their businesses and their children. Does that interest you at all?
Yes, the work that I do full-time is with Covenant Financial Planners, and we do business succession transition planning. So it's quite fascinating, because for most entrepreneurs, there's a difference between the ownership and the management. So you can pass on the ownership of the company to the kids and keep that wealth in the family, but a lot of entrepreneurs realize that it's hard to pass on the management. There's a lot of challenges with it. So that's a real challenging issue for most entrepreneurs, how they can actually pass on the business. So it can be done, but if you've got 3 kids, maybe only one is really suited to be in the business, and the other 2 can be part owners of the business, but not actively involved.
I was fascinated years ago when I read what Warren Buffett said in response to what he would do with his money and his children. He said, I'll give them enough that they can do anything, but not enough that they can do nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, that was real wisdom. Richard Goossen, Entrepreneurial Leaders, Reflections on Faith at Work, a man who is taking some real leadership in the nation and around the world in terms of Christian faith and pushing the horizon in business. Thanks for coming our way.